Millionaire forces, pregnant wife out. But her secret changed the course of his entire empire. He was a king on a throne of code, a self-made billionaire who controlled everything and everyone. So when Nathaniel Quinn suspected his pregnant wife of betrayal, he did what kings do. He banished her. He left her penniless, confident in his absolute power. But he made one fatal error. He never bothered to understand the woman he married. He had no idea she was the secret architect of his entire empire, the ghost in his machine. In casting her out, he didn't just lose a wife. He handed his greatest creation the power to become his greatest rival. The air in the Quinn penthouse was always the same. Cool, still, and smelling faintly of ozone and expensive minimalist floral arrangements. It was the smell of manufactured perfection, a scent Nathaniel Quinn had curated just as he had curated every other aspect of his life. From his perch on the 80th floor, all of Manhattan seemed to kneel before him, a glittering tapestry of lights he felt he had personally woven. Nathaniel was a man forged in the crucible of a destitute childhood. He hadn't just climbed the ladder, he had built the ladder, then set the old one on fire. His company, Quinn Innovations, was a titan in the tech world, famous for its revolutionary operating system, Aegis, a platform so secure and intuitive it had become the gold standard for global finance and data security. He was ruthless, brilliant, and pathologically obsessed with control. Everything and everyone was an asset or a liability. His wife, Liana, was, in his mind, his most prized asset. She was graceful, intelligent, with a quiet warmth that softened his brutalist edges in public. She was the perfect complement to his public image. He had met her at a gallery opening, where she was an art history graduate student, her eyes filled with a passion for things he couldn't quantify or monetize. He found it quaint. He found her beautiful. He'd pursued her with the same relentless focus he applied to a corporate takeover, and in the end, she had yielded. For Liana, the first year had been a dizzying romance. Nathaniel could be charming, showering her with affection and a world she'd only read about. She believed she saw a flicker of vulnerability beneath the armor, a lost boy who just needed to feel safe. She thought her love could be his sanctuary. She was wrong. Love, for Nathaniel, was possession. Her friends were vetted. Her calls were monitored by his ever-present household security system. Her opinions were tolerated as long as they didn't contradict his. Slowly, the Gilded Cage had materialized around her. Her art history career was shelved for philanthropic pursuits that were really just extensions of his brand. She was becoming another one of his perfect, sterile floral arrangements. Then came the pregnancy. When Liana told him, his reaction wasn't the tender joy she had dreamed of. His eyes lit up with a conqueror's glint, a legacy, an heir. The Quinn Dynasty. A boy, he declared, his hand possessively on her still flat stomach. He'll be named Nathaniel Quinn Jr. What if it's a girl? Liana had asked softly, a knot of dread tightening in her chest. Nathaniel had waved a dismissive hand. We'll try again for a boy, but the first must be a son. The power imbalance, once a subtle pressure, became a crushing weight. He dictated her diet, her exercise, her social schedule. It was all for the health of my heir. Her body was no longer her own. It was the vessel for his legacy. The psychological conflict within her raged. The woman she used to be, independent, vibrant, full of ideas, was suffocating. She stayed because she was pregnant, because she still clung to the foolish hope that the baby would change him, and because, deep down, she was terrified of him. The catalyst for the end arrived in a cloud of Chanel No. 5 and razor-sharp ambition. Her name was Selena Graves. A new legal counsel for Quinn Innovations, Selena was Nathaniel's reflection in female form. Sleek, predatory, and utterly devoted to power. She saw Liana not as a person, but as a placeholder in a position she coveted. Selena began her campaign subtly. A whispered word in Nathaniel's ear about a concerned call from a board member. An insinuation about Liana's distractedness. She preyed on Nathaniel's deepest insecurity. His terror of being betrayed, a holdover from a past where everyone had let him down. "She seems distant lately, Nathaniel," Selena said one evening, lingering in his office after everyone else had gone. "I saw her having coffee with that artist friend of hers. Eli Navarro, I think." They looked awfully close. It was a lie, but a masterful one. Eli was Liana's friend from college, openly gay and more like a brother to her. But Nathaniel's paranoia didn't deal in logic. It dealt in threats. The final act took place on a rainy Tuesday night. Liana was 5 months pregnant, a visible swell now defining her waist. Nathaniel came home late, his face a thundercloud. Selena's poison had finally taken root. He'd spent the day stewing, his mind twisting a casual coffee meeting into a grand conspiracy of betrayal. He found Liana in the nursery she'd been trying to design, a room he'd insisted be decorated in stark corporate grays. She was holding up a small, hand-knitted yellow blanket, a gift from her mother. It was the only spot of color in the room. "What is that?" he snapped, his voice cracking like a whip. Liana flinched. "It's a blanket. My mother made it." "It's frivolous," he said, striding into the room. "And I told you, no yellow. This room is for a future CEO, not a poet." He snatched the blanket from her hands and tossed it into a corner. Tears sprang to Liana's eyes. It wasn't about the blanket. It was about the last shred of her identity being summarily dismissed. "Nathaniel, stop. It's just a blanket. It means something to me." "What means something to you, Liana?" he sneered, advancing on her. "Sentimental trash? Or is it secret meetings with old flames? Don't think I don't know. Don't think I don't see everything." Liana stared at him, her blood running cold. "What are you talking about? Eli?" "So you admit it!" he roared, his face contorted with a rage that seemed to swell and fill the cavernous room. "You think I built all this just to be made a fool of? To have my wife, pregnant with my son, sneaking around behind my back?" "Sneaking around? He's my friend, Nathaniel. We had coffee," she cried, her voice trembling. "You're being paranoid." "I am being careful," he bellowed. "I can't have a weak link. I can't have a tainted legacy. I look at you now, and I don't see my wife. I see a liability. A woman carrying a child that might not even be mine." The accusation hung in the air, so vile, so utterly baseless it stole the breath from her lungs. That was it, the final irreparable crack. The boy she thought she could save was gone, consumed by the monster. "How dare you?" she whispered, her fear suddenly incinerated by a white-hot, protective fury for the child inside her. "I dare because this is my house, my company, my name. My son," he said, his voice dropping to a lethally cold tone. "And I am purging a threat." He pulled out his phone and pressed a button. "Marcus Reed," he said to his head of security. "Mrs. Quinn is leaving. Escort her from the building. She is to take nothing but her handbag. Her access is revoked. From everything." Liana's world tilted on its axis. "Nathaniel, no. You can't. I'm pregnant. It's your child." He looked at her, his eyes as dead and gray as the nursery walls. "I'll have my lawyers arrange a paternity test after it's born. If it's mine, I will provide the legal minimum. Now get out." 2 stoic security guards appeared at the door. They didn't look at her. They looked at Nathaniel, awaiting his final nod. Liana looked at her husband's face, searching for a trace of the man she had loved. There was nothing, just cold, hard, polished stone. The truth hit her then. He wasn't a lost boy. He was just lost. With a final, shattering sob, she turned. She didn't look back at the gray nursery or the glittering city lights. Flanked by the guards, she walked out of the penthouse, out of the life she had known, and into the cold, unforgiving rain of a New York night, with nothing but a small purse, a broken heart, and a secret. A secret so profound that Nathaniel, in his blind rage, could never have conceived of it. He thought he was purging a liability. He had just thrown away the architect of his entire empire. The elevator ride down the 80 floors was a silent, suffocating descent into a new reality. The two guards, Marcus Reed and another man she didn't know, stood like statues, their faces impassive. Liana stared at her reflection in the polished bronze doors, a ghost of the woman who had ascended in this same elevator just hours before, her mind on organic vegetables and prenatal vitamins. Now, her face was a mask of tear-streaked shock, her designer dress feeling like a costume from another life. When the doors opened onto the marble lobby, the doorman, who had always greeted her with a warm, "Good evening, Mrs. Quinn," averted his eyes. The transaction was complete. She was no longer Mrs. Quinn. She was an unperson. Marcus Reed escorted her to the curb, the rain plastering her thin silk dress to her skin. A black town car, not her usual one, idled there. "Where is it taking me?" she asked, her voice hoarse. "A hotel for the night. Mr. Quinn's instructions. A legal summons will be delivered to you in the morning," Marcus Reed said, his tone devoid of any emotion. He was just closing a security ticket. He held the door open. For a moment, Liana was tempted to get in, to follow the path of least resistance Nathaniel had laid out for her. One more night of his money, his control. No, the fire that had ignited in the nursery was still smoldering. It was a tiny ember of defiance in a sea of despair. But it was there. She looked at Marcus Reed. Then at the open car door. "Tell Mr. Quinn I won't be needing his charity," she said, her voice shaking but firm. She turned and walked away from the car, disappearing into the downpour and the steam rising from the city grates. She had no destination, no plan. She just knew she couldn't take one more thing from him. Her purse contained her phone, her wallet with about $300 in cash, and a few credit cards. She walked 2 blocks, her mind a maelstrom of panic and disbelief, before hailing a cab. As she slid onto the worn vinyl seat, she saw a notification pop up on her phone. Credit card alert. Card frozen by primary account holder. Then another, and another. He was systematic, efficient, erasing her. Her bank account, a joint one, would be next. The $300 in her wallet was all she had in the world. There was only one person she could call. Nina? Her voice broke on the name. Nina Tran had been her best friend since their freshman year of college. A sharp, no-nonsense journalist, Nina had always been skeptical of Nathaniel, calling him Mr. Monopoly, with a sole deficit. Liana had defended him, but Nina had just watched and waited, knowing this day might come. "Liana, oh my God, what's wrong? Where are you?" Through choked sobs, Liana explained the impossible truth. "He threw me out, Nina. He thinks I cheated on him. He's taking everything. Where are you right now?" Nina's voice was instantly calm, a lighthouse in the storm. "In a cab. I don't know where to go." "Come to me. Now I'll buzz you up." Nina lived in a small, rent-stabilized one-bedroom in Brooklyn that felt more like a home than the Quinn penthouse ever had. It smelled of old books, coffee, and Nina's chaotic energy. When Liana arrived, soaked and shivering, Nina wrapped her in a thick, worn quilt and sat her down at the cluttered kitchen table, pushing a steaming mug of tea into her hands. For the first time that night, Liana broke down completely, the full weight of her situation crashing down on her. The humiliation, the fear for her baby, the utter betrayal by the man she had, for a time, truly loved. Nina just held her, letting her cry until there were no tears left. The next few days were a blur of legal dread. As Marcus Reed had promised, a lawyer delivered a thick envelope to Nina's apartment. It was a formal notice of divorce proceedings, citing infidelity, and a restraining order preventing her from coming within 500 feet of any Quinn property or Nathaniel himself. It also included a chillingly formal offer: relinquish all future claims and submit to a post-birth paternity test, and a modest one-time settlement would be considered. "He's trying to bury you," Nina said, her eyes flashing with anger as she read the documents. "He's building a public narrative where he's the victim." Liana felt a wave of nausea that had nothing to do with morning sickness. He wasn't just divorcing her. He was annihilating her character. Her phone, the one from her purse, was still active for now, a lifeline she clung to. She tried calling her parents, who lived in a quiet suburb in Ohio. Her mother's tearful voice was a comfort. But her father, a pragmatic man always intimidated by Nathaniel's wealth, was cautious. "Liana, are you sure you should be fighting him?" he'd asked nervously. "He's a powerful man. Maybe you should just do what his lawyers say. We don't have the money to fight someone like Nathaniel Quinn." His words, meant to be protective, felt like another betrayal. They couldn't see the monster. They only saw the millionaire. She hung up, feeling more alone than ever. The cage had not just been physical. It had been psychological, isolating her from anyone who might have helped her stand up for herself. Living in Nina's tiny apartment was untenable long-term. Liana was a ticking clock, her pregnancy advancing daily. New York, a city that had once felt like a kingdom at her feet, now felt like a predator. Every skyscraper seemed to bear Nathaniel's shadow. Every newsstand had magazines with his face on the cover. She couldn't escape him. "You need to disappear," Nina said one night, looking at Liana's pale, haunted face. "Not forever, just until the baby is born. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere he won't think to look." Nina had an aunt who owned a small cottage on the Oregon coast in a tiny town called Cannon Ridge. It was vacant, used only a few weeks a year. "It's nothing fancy," Nina explained. "It's old. The Wi-Fi is spotty and it smells of sea salt and old wood. But it's safe. It's yours for as long as you need it. Oregon." It sounded like another planet, a place of mist and trees and quiet, a world away from the steel and glass prison she'd left behind. It was terrifying, and it was perfect. Using the last of her cash and a loan from Nina, Liana bought a bus ticket under her maiden name, Hart. She left the phone Nathaniel had given her on Nina's table, smashing it with a heavy book before she left. It was a symbolic act, severing the last digital leash. She bought a cheap, untraceable burner phone. The bus ride across the country was a 3-day journey through the heart of a nation she had only ever seen from 30,000 feet. She watched the cities bleed into suburbs, then into vast stretches of farmland and desert. She was no longer Liana Quinn, the millionaire's wife. She was just a woman on a bus, her swelling belly her only companion. She felt stripped bare, reduced to her most essential self. When she finally stepped off the bus in Cannon Ridge, the air hit her first. It was thick with the scent of salt, pine, and damp earth. The town was a small collection of weathered buildings nestled between a dense, evergreen forest and a vast, moody expanse of the Pacific Ocean. Gray waves crashed onto a long, sandy beach littered with dramatic rock formations. The cottage was just as Nina described it: small, rustic, and profoundly peaceful. It stood on a bluff overlooking the ocean, its cedar shingles weathered gray by the sea spray. Inside, it was simple: a stone fireplace, mismatched furniture, braided rugs on the wooden floors. It was the antithesis of the Quinn penthouse. It was real. That first night, Liana sat on the porch wrapped in a quilt, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and violet. For the first time in months, the air didn't feel manufactured. It felt alive. The tightness in her chest began to loosen, ever so slightly. She placed a hand on her belly, where she felt a faint flutter, a kick. Here, in this quiet corner of the world, she wasn't a liability or an asset. She was just Liana, a mother-to-be. The fall had been brutal, terrifying, but as she listened to the rhythmic crash of the waves, she felt a strange, unfamiliar sensation. It wasn't happiness. Not yet. It was something more foundational. It was the feeling of solid ground beneath her feet. The first few months in Cannon Ridge were about survival. Liana established a quiet routine, governed by the tides and the needs of her growing baby. She lived frugally on the money Nina sent her, walking into town for groceries, spending her days reading library books and taking long, slow walks on the beach. The townsfolk were reserved but kind, respecting her privacy. To them, she was just a quiet woman from the city, come to the coast to have her baby in peace. The anonymity was a balm. She gave birth in a small community hospital in a nearby town. There were no private suites, no celebrity obstetricians. There was just a kind, overworked nurse and a doctor with laugh lines around his eyes. She named her son Micah. Not Nathaniel Jr., just Micah. Holding him for the first time, a fierce, primal love washed over her, erasing the last vestiges of the woman who had cried in a billionaire's penthouse. This small, perfect creature was hers, her purpose, her world. With Micah's arrival, the need for more than just survival became urgent. Nina's generosity couldn't last forever. Liana needed to build a life, a real one, for her son. She had her degree in art history, but there were no museums or galleries in Cannon Ridge. There were, however, a library with public computers and a surprisingly decent internet connection. And Liana had her secret. The world knew Nathaniel Quinn as the genius behind Quinn Innovations. The media lauded his vision, his drive, his almost preternatural understanding of the tech landscape. But the truth was, Nathaniel was a brilliant businessman, a ruthless negotiator, and a master of marketing. He was not, however, a programmer. He couldn't write a single line of code. The revolutionary core of the Aegis operating system, the elegant, impenetrable architecture that made it a fortress of data security, was not his creation. It was Liana's, years ago in college. Before she'd even met Nathaniel, Liana Hart wasn't just an art history major. She was a prodigy in a clandestine world. Under the anonymous handle Ethel, she had been a legendary figure in the open-source coding community. Ethel, a nod to Ethelfled, the Anglo-Saxon queen who built fortresses and defended her kingdom, was known for creating code that was less like engineering and more like poetry. It was intuitive, beautiful, and virtually unbreakable. She had created the foundational framework for what would become Aegis as a passion project, posting it on a niche forum for elite programmers. When Nathaniel started his company, he was desperately searching for a breakthrough. He'd stumbled upon Ethel's work, recognizing its revolutionary potential. He put out a call, offering a fortune for Ethel to come work for him. Liana, young and idealistic, responded, but on her own terms. She refused to be identified. She was terrified of the corporate world, of having her passion twisted into a product. They communicated through encrypted channels. She agreed to build out the full operating system for a one-time anonymous payment, a substantial sum that she'd use to pay for her graduate studies and put into a secure trust, never telling anyone about it. She handed over her masterpiece and walked away, retiring the Ethel handle forever. A year later, she met Nathaniel Quinn at that gallery. He never knew. He saw an art student, not the ghost architect of his fortune. And Liana, falling in love, made a calculated decision. She saw his obsession with being seen as a self-made genius. To reveal her past would be to emasculate him, to shatter the very foundation of his identity. So she kept her secret, believing it was an act of love to let him have his victory. It became the darkest of ironies that he would accuse her of a betrayal she could never commit, while being ignorant of the incredible truth she had gifted him. Now, sitting in the quiet library of Cannon Ridge, with Micah asleep in his stroller beside her, she decided it was time for Ethel to come out of retirement. Not for revenge. Revenge was Nathaniel's language. This was about creation. It was for Micah. She couldn't risk using the Ethel name. Nathaniel was undoubtedly still paranoid and might have alerts set for it. She needed a new identity. She began freelancing under a new, anonymous pseudonym, Juno. Her first jobs were small, fixing bugs for local businesses, designing a simple website for a bed and breakfast. Her reputation, however, grew with lightning speed. The elegance and efficiency of her code were unmistakable to those who knew what they were looking for. Word began to spread through the freelance tech world. Juno was fast, brilliant, and her work was flawless. Within 6 months, she was making a steady income. She was able to pay Nina back and start her own savings account. She bought a used laptop and set up a proper workstation in a corner of the cottage overlooking the sea. She was no longer just surviving. She was building. Her breakthrough came from a problem she herself faced. As a single mother and a freelancer, managing her time, projects, and finances was a constant juggling act. The existing software was clunky, designed for corporate teams. So she started building her own solution. An application. She called it Haven. Haven was an all-in-one platform for freelancers and sole proprietors. It integrated project management, invoicing, time tracking, and tax preparation into a single, beautifully simple interface. The code was classic Ethel, intuitive, secure, and user-centric. It anticipated needs the user didn't even know they had. She used her own growing network as Juno to beta test it. The feedback was ecstatic. This wasn't just another app. It was a game changer for the gig economy. With a small business loan from a local credit union who believed in her business plan, Liana, as Juno, officially launched Haven. She didn't have a marketing budget. She had something better, a perfect product that spread by word of mouth. Freelancers, designers, consultants, writers, they all flocked to it. Haven was empowering the very people the corporate world often overlooked. It was the antithesis of Nathaniel's top-down, monolithic empire. It was a grassroots revolution. Liana was no longer hiding. She was thriving. She bought the little cottage from Nina's aunt. She planted a garden. She made friends in the town. She was Liana Hart, a successful tech entrepreneur and a single mom to a happy, thriving little boy named Micah. She would watch him play on the beach, the vast Pacific sky stretching above them, and feel a profound sense of peace. She had lost a gilded cage and found an entire world. The woman Nathaniel Quinn had thrown away was gone. In her place was someone stronger, someone he would never even recognize. Back in New York, the Quinn Innovations Tower was beginning to feel less like a fortress and more like a tomb. In the year following Liana's departure, Nathaniel had gotten everything he thought he wanted. He had installed Selena Graves not just in his legal department, but in his life. She was a fixture at his side, sleek and smiling for the cameras, a perfect corporate consort. The divorce from Liana had been swift and brutal. A footnote in the financial press about Nathaniel Quinn streamlining his personal life. The narrative he had crafted of the betrayed husband had held, but the foundation of his empire was cracking. The Aegis operating system, once his crown jewel, was starting to show its age. It was a masterpiece, but it was a finished one. The digital world evolved at a blistering pace, and Aegis wasn't evolving with it. New cyber threats were emerging, more sophisticated than the ones Aegis was designed to repel. A hot new competitor, a startup from Zurich called Prometheus, had released a system that was more flexible, more adaptable. Some of Quinn's smaller clients were starting to defect. Nathaniel pushed his teams of programmers to innovate, to build Aegis 2.0, but they couldn't replicate the original's genius. They could patch it, add features, but they couldn't touch the core architecture. It was like trying to add a new chapter to a book written by a master. Their prose was clunky, their logic flawed. The code was so uniquely structured that any major alteration attempt resulted in system-wide instability. "Why can't you fix it?" Nathaniel would rage in board meetings, his face puce. "I pay you millions." His lead engineer, a man named Jordan Lynn, who had been with him from the beginning, tried to explain. "Sir, the core code, It's like a perfect puzzle. We don't know how the original architect's mind worked. We're trying to reverse engineer a work of art. We can't replicate the intuition. The name Ethel was spoken only in hushed, reverent tones in the engineering department. She was the ghost in their machine, a mythical figure who had delivered perfection and then vanished. Nathaniel became obsessed. He poured millions into a covert operation to find her. He hired digital forensics teams and private investigators to scour the dark corners of the web, to follow decade-old digital breadcrumbs. They found nothing. Ethel had vanished without a trace. Selena, for her part, was useless in this regard. Her expertise was in contracts and litigation, not innovation. She was skilled at acquiring smaller companies, but her strategy was to gut them for parts, not nurture their growth. The corporate culture at Quinn Innovations, once driven by a sense of revolutionary purpose, soured into one of fear and stagnation. Talent began to bleed from the company. Nathaniel grew more isolated, more paranoid. The victory of casting Liana out felt hollow. He had expected to feel liberated, but instead a strange void had opened up in his life. The penthouse was cold and silent. Selena filled it with noise and people, but not warmth. He sometimes found himself standing in the gray nursery, which had been converted into a home gym, feeling an ache he couldn't name. He had never followed up on the paternity test. In the weeks after he'd thrown Liana out, his rage had cooled into a stubborn, prideful silence. His lawyers had advised him that pursuing it would look bad, an admission that he might have been wrong. So he had simply erased her. He told himself the child wasn't his, that she had been a clever grifter. It was the only way his psyche could justify his own cruelty. Then Haven appeared. It started as a murmur in the tech blogs, then grew to a roar. A new app for the gig economy, built by an anonymous coder named Juno, was taking the world by storm. It was being hailed for its elegance, its security, its user-centric design. Analysts praised its poetic code and intuitive architecture. Jordan Lin, his lead engineer, brought it to Nathaniel's attention. "Sir, you need to see this. The design philosophy, it's uncanny." Nathaniel, dismissive at first, downloaded Haven. As he navigated the interface, a chill went down his spine. It felt familiar. The seamless logic. The invisible complexity masked by perfect simplicity. It felt like Aegis. It felt like Ethel. "Find Juno," Nathaniel commanded, his voice low and intense. "I don't care what it costs. Find out who this is. I want to buy this company. I want to buy this mind." The hunt for Juno began. But unlike the search for Ethel, this time there was a registered company, a business loan, a digital footprint, however small. The investigators started with the loan application from a small credit union in coastal Oregon. They got a name. A senior private investigator, a former FBI agent named Ethan Cross, flew to Oregon. He sat in his rental car across the street from a small, cedar-shingled cottage on a bluff overlooking the Pacific. He watched a woman with warm brown hair, her face happy and relaxed, playing on the beach with a small, dark-haired boy. He ran the name from the loan through his databases. Liana Hart. He pulled up old society photos from New York. And there she was. Younger, more polished, but unmistakably the same woman. The former Mrs. Nathaniel Quinn. Cross sat in his car, the pieces clicking into place with a sickening thud. Juno was Liana Hart, and if Juno's code felt like Ethel's, he made the call to Nathaniel. "We found Juno," Cross said, his voice grave. "It's a sole proprietorship. We have the founder's name." "Who is it?" Nathaniel demanded, pacing his office, the New York skyline a blur behind him. "Give me the name." Cross took a deep breath. "Sir, the founder of Haven is Liana Hart." Silence. The only sound was the hum of the city far below. Nathaniel Quinn stood frozen, the phone pressed to his ear. The world, which he had so carefully constructed, so ruthlessly controlled, simply ceased to exist. Every certainty he had built his life on, every justification for his actions, crumbled into dust. Ethel, Juno, Liana, the woman he had discarded like trash, the architect of his kingdom, the mother of his son. It was all her. It had always been her. He didn't just purge a liability. He had thrown away his own heart, his own soul, his own genius. And now, as his empire crumbled, he realized she had built a new one, all on her own, in the one place he never thought to look. The flight to Oregon was on Nathaniel's private jet, but it brought him no comfort. The plush leather seats felt like thorns. The silent cabin an echo chamber for his unraveling mind. He stared out the window at the clouds below, but he didn't see them. He saw Liana's face on the night he'd thrown her out. The shock, the hurt, the sudden terrifying flash of fury in her eyes. He saw the hand-knitted yellow blanket he had tossed aside with such contempt. "How dare you?" Her whispered words now boomed in his memory. The investigator, Cross, had given him the address, a cottage in a place called Cannon Ridge. Nathaniel had his pilot land at a small private airfield an hour away. He rented a nondescript SUV, needing to approach this new reality on his own terms, without the trapping of his wealth. Driving along the winding coastal highway, the sheer raw beauty of the landscape felt like an accusation. The towering green forests, the wild, crashing ocean. It was a world that didn't know or care about Quinn innovations. It was Liana's world now. He found the cottage easily. It was small, unpretentious, nestled on a cliffside. He parked down the road and walked, his heart hammering against his ribs with a force he hadn't felt since his first high-stakes business deal. He felt like an intruder, a trespasser. He saw them before they saw him. On the sandy beach below the cottage, Liana was laughing. It was a sound he hadn't heard in years, a free, unburdened laugh. She was chasing a small boy who was squealing with delight, his dark hair ruffled by the sea breeze. Micah. He was about 1.5 years old, sturdy on his feet, his face a perfect miniature blend of Liana's soft features and Nathaniel's own dark eyes. The sight struck him with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't an abstract concept anymore. This was his son, a happy, healthy little boy who had no idea his father existed. A son who was growing up in a world of love and laughter, a world Nathaniel had tried to prevent by insisting on a gray, sterile nursery. He watched for what felt like an eternity, a ghost observing a life he had forfeited. He saw Liana kneel down and hug the boy, pointing out at a flock of seagulls. He saw the easy, unconditional love between them. A love he had never known how to give or receive. Finally, steeling himself, he walked down the wooden steps that led to the beach. Liana saw him first. Her laughter died in her throat. Her body went rigid, and she instinctively pulled Micah behind her, her hand resting protectively on his shoulder. Her face, once open and joyful, became a mask of cold, guarded neutrality. The warm, approachable woman was gone. In her place was the CEO of Haven. "Nathaniel," she said. Her voice was not shaky or tearful. It was level, the voice of a stranger. He stopped about 20 feet away from her, the space between them charged with unspoken history. The crashing waves were the only sound. "Liana," he managed to say, his own voice sounding foreign to him. He looked from her guarded face to the curious eyes of the little boy peeking out from behind her legs. What could he possibly say? "I'm sorry. I was wrong. I'm a monster?" The words were inadequate, obscene in the face of what he had done. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her tone cutting through his paralysis. There was no room for apologies in her question. It was a demand. "I know," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "About Haven. About Ethel." A flicker of something, not surprise, but perhaps grim acknowledgement, passed through her eyes. She had likely known this day would come. "So your investigators finally earned their keep," she said coolly. She nudged Micah gently. "Micah, sweetie, why don't you go look for that pretty shell we saw? Mommy will be right there." The boy, sensing the tension, looked from his mother to the strange man, then obediently toddled a few feet away, his attention immediately captured by a piece of driftwood. Once he was out of earshot, Liana's gaze returned to Nathaniel, and it was glacial. "You have 5 minutes. Then you're going to get in your car and leave. You are not welcome here. You are not welcome in our lives." The hour hit him harder than any accusation. "The company is failing, Liana," he blurted out, the words tasting like ash. It was a pathetic, selfish thing to say, but it was the only truth he knew how to lead with. "Aegis, we can't fix it. We can't advance it. Prometheus is eating us alive. The board is talking about ousting me." She looked at him, and for the first time, he saw a glimmer of pity in her eyes. But it was the pity one might feel for a pathetic, cornered animal. "And you came here expecting what?" she asked. "That I would just hand over my life's work, again, to save you? That I would come back and fix your mess? The mess you made?" "No," he said, shaking his head, though a part of him knew that was exactly the desperate, insane hope that had propelled him across the country. I don't know what I expected. I just had to see you. I had to see him." He glanced at Micah, who was now digging happily in the sand. "His name is Micah," she said sharply, "and he is happy. He is safe. He is loved. He has everything he needs. He doesn't need a father who would throw his pregnant mother out into the rain because of his own pathetic insecurities." Every word was a perfectly aimed dart, and he deserved every single one. "You built all this," he said, gesturing vaguely at the cottage, the beach, her life. "Haven. It's brilliant. More brilliant than Aegis." "Yes, I did," she said simply. "Because I had to. Because you left me with nothing. Or so you thought. You took the money, the home, the name. You never thought to ask what was in my head. You didn't care. It was the biggest mistake of your life, Nathaniel. Not because you lost your programmer, but because you threw away the one person who actually, for some insane reason, loved you." The quiet sincerity of that last statement finally broke him. Tears welled in his eyes, hot, shameful tears. The great Nathaniel Quinn, the titan of industry, stood on a beach in Oregon and wept in front of the wife he had tried to destroy. "I loved you too," he choked out. "I was just broken, afraid. I destroyed the best thing in my life because I didn't know how to trust it." Liana watched him, her expression unreadable. She did not rush to comfort him. She did not soften. She simply stood her ground, the queen of her small, beautiful kingdom. "Your brokenness is your own to fix," she said, her voice softer now, but no less firm. "It is not my responsibility anymore, and it will never be Micah's. Your 5 minutes are up, Nathaniel." She turned, called Micah's name, and took her son's hand. Without a backward glance, she walked back up the beach toward the wooden steps, leaving him utterly alone, with nothing but the wreckage of his choices and the sound of the Pacific tide, washing away the world he once knew. He had come for a collision, and it had happened. But it wasn't a negotiation or a battle. It was a judgment. And he had been found wanting. Nathaniel did not leave. He got in his SUV and drove to a generic motel in the next town over. He spent the next 3 days in a self-imposed exile, the sterile room a fitting reflection of his hollowed-out soul. He didn't call his office. He didn't call Selena, who was surely leaving a trail of frantic, unanswered voicemails. He just thought, he replayed his life, not as the triumphant narrative he'd always told himself, but as a series of transactions driven by fear. Fear of poverty. Fear of irrelevance. Fear of betrayal. He had treated everyone, including Liana, as a chess piece in a game against that fear. By trying to control everything, he had understood nothing. Liana's words echoed in his mind. Your brokenness is your own to fix. He realized redemption wasn't something he could demand or purchase. It wasn't about getting Liana back or saving his company. It was about becoming a man who was worthy of being Micah's father, even from a distance. On the fourth day, he acted. He called his board of directors. He didn't make excuses. He told them the unvarnished truth. The core architecture of the Aegis operating system was created by a programmer known as Ethel, he announced on the conference call, his voice steady. I have located this programmer. However, the intellectual property was not properly acquired by Quinn Innovations. It was created prior to her association with me, and her identity has been a closely guarded secret. That programmer is my ex-wife, Liana Hart. A stunned silence filled the virtual boardroom. Furthermore, Nathaniel continued, the recent success haven was also created by her. She is, without question, one of the most brilliant software architects alive. And due to my own personal, catastrophic failings, our company has no claim to her or her work. I have failed this company. I have exposed us to immense legal and financial risk, and therefore, I am resigning as CEO of Quinn Innovations, effective immediately. He didn't wait for their chaotic questions. He ended the call. His next call was to his lawyers. He instructed them to fly to Oregon, not to threaten Liana, but to surrender. He told them to draw up an offer, one so outrageously in Liana's favor, it was less a negotiation and more a plea. A few days later, a calm, respectful lawyer, not one of Nathaniel's usual sharks, approached Liana. The offer was staggering. Nathaniel was ceding 51% of his personal shares in Quinn Innovations directly to her, making her the majority shareholder. He was formally acknowledging her as the creator of Aegis and proposing a massive, backdated licensing fee to be paid to her personally, rectifying the initial anonymous payment. He was stepping down from the board entirely. He was, in effect, handing her his empire. His only request was not for forgiveness or a reconciliation, but for the chance, someday, to be a part of Micah's life, in whatever capacity she saw fit. He also offered to fund Haven, no strings attached, as a subsidiary under her complete and total control. Liana, sitting at her simple kitchen table with the document spread before her, was floored. This wasn't the Nathaniel she knew. This wasn't a power play. It was a capitulation. It was perhaps the beginning of an apology, made not in words, but in deeds. She didn't accept immediately. She took her time, consulting with her own lawyers, whom Nina had helped her find. She looked at her son, playing on the floor with wooden blocks, and thought about his future. This wasn't about her and Nathaniel anymore. It was about legacy, a true one, not the hollow dynasty he had once envisioned. She sent back a counteroffer. She would accept control of Quinn Innovations, but she would not take his personal shares for free. She would buy them at a reduced but fair market rate, using the capital from the backdated licensing fees. She didn't want a handout. She wanted to own her victory. She agreed to keep Quinn Innovations and Haven as two separate companies, but proposed a strategic partnership, allowing Haven's user-centric philosophy to bleed into and revitalize the stagnant corporate culture of Quinn. She also added a personal clause. Nathaniel could see Micah. It would start with short, supervised visits in Cannon Ridge. There would be no talk of business. He would not be Nathaniel Quinn, the founder. He would just be Nathaniel, a man trying to be a father. His relationship with his son was something he had to build from the ground up, with patience and humility. Nathaniel agreed to all of it. The months that followed were a seismic shift. Liana Hart, the quiet woman from the coast, was announced as the new majority shareholder and chairperson of Quinn Innovations. The tech world was stunned. The story of the hidden genius, Ethel, becoming a legend. She didn't move back to New York. She ran her empire from her cottage in Oregon, flying in for board meetings, bringing her quiet, unshakable authority to the company she had inadvertently created. She dismantled the culture of fear, fostered collaboration, and started the long, difficult process of merging the innovative spirit of Haven with the powerful infrastructure of Quinn Innovations. She rebranded Aegis, crediting Ethel in the official history, and started a foundation to support women in tech. Nathaniel, stripped of his titles, began his own quiet journey. He sold the penthouse and moved into a modest apartment. He started therapy. He began the slow, awkward process of getting to know his son. The first few visits were stilted. He didn't know how to play, how to talk to a toddler, but he kept showing up. He brought no expensive gifts, just his presence. He learned to listen. He learned about starfish and sandcastles. He learned Micah loved the color yellow. One afternoon, months into their visits, he arrived at the cottage with a small, clumsily wrapped package. It was a soft, hand-knitted yellow blanket he had commissioned from a local artisan. He gave it to Micah. Liana watched from the doorway as Nathaniel sat on the floor with their son, the boy wrapping the blanket around his shoulders like a cape. For the first time, she saw a flicker of the man she had once hoped he could be. A man humbled, a man trying, a man building something real out of the ashes of his pride. Their story was not a fairy tale. They did not get back together. The wound was too deep, the betrayal too profound. But they forged something new, something more complex and honest. They became partners in the truest sense, partners in business and co-parents to their son. The Quinn Empire was reborn, no longer the product of one man's fear, but the joint legacy of two brilliant minds, forever linked by the son who was the living embodiment of their complicated, painful, and ultimately redemptive story. The power imbalance was gone, replaced by a hard-won equilibrium, built not on a gilded cage, but on the solid ground of truth. In the end, Nathaniel Quinn's empire wasn't destroyed. It was transformed. He learned that true power isn't about control, but about creation, humility, and the courage to admit when you are broken. Liana Hart, once a victim of his cruelty, rose from the ashes not to seek revenge, but to build a better world, for herself, for her son, and for the very company that had cast her out. Their story reminds us that our deepest secrets can be our greatest strengths, and that redemption is a difficult, painful path that is always worth walking. If this story of resilience, betrayal, and the ultimate triumph of truth moved you, please give this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone who appreciates a story of strength and second chances. And for more emotional stories that explore the complexities of the human heart, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think is the true meaning of power?